You want to know how a graduation party can disappear before the caterer finishes unloading the van? I was standing at my kitchen counter in Oakville, rolling butter pastry for the tarts I'd promised to bring, when my phone buzzed on the counter. I didn't pick it up right away. My hands were floury, and I was listening to the radio, a talk station out of Hamilton that I've had on every Saturday morning for 30 years. The kind of routine that holds you together when everything else is shifting. My son was getting his MBA from McMaster, 6 years of night classes while holding down a full-time job at a logistics firm in Burlington, 6 years of me driving over on weeknights to watch my granddaughter so he and his wife could manage the schedule. I didn't mind. That's not me being a martyr. I genuinely didn't mind. Watching that little girl grow up while her father studied at the dining room table 2 rooms over felt like something worth doing, something real. The party was my idea, not a surprise. My son knew. But the venue, the catering, the decorations, the hotel block I'd reserved for relatives coming in from Halifax and from out west, all of that was mine. I'd put close to $12,000 into it over 4 months, not because anyone asked me to, because that's what you do when someone you love earns something. The phone buzzed again. I rinsed my hands and picked it up. It was a voicemail from my son's wife, except she hadn't meant to leave it. I stood at the counter with flowers still on my wrists and listened to 2.5 minutes of a conversation she was having with her mother. They didn't know the call had gone through. They were in what sounded like a car, road noise underneath their voices, the occasional click of a turn signal. Her mother was speaking first. I'd met the woman 4 times in 6 years. Each time she'd looked at me the way people look at furniture they've been asked to move around. She said, "You know she's going to make this about herself. She always does." My daughter-in-law laughed, not a nervous laugh, a comfortable one. She already sent me the seating chart. She put herself at the head table. Of course she did. Who does that? It's not her party. There was a pause. Then my daughter-in-law said, "Honestly, Mom, I've been thinking, what if we just moved it to the Ancaster Mill? We could do a smaller thing, more intimate, just our people." Her mother said, "And you just tell her, what? That we wanted something quieter, that we appreciated everything, but we're going to handle it from here." "What about the deposits?" Another pause. "She already paid them. They're non-refundable." I set the phone down on the counter. I stood there for a long time, long enough for the butter in my pastry to soften too much, long enough for the radio to go to commercial and come back again. I want to tell you that I was surprised, but I think I would be lying. There had been a quality to the past 2 years, a cooling, a careful politeness that replaced something warmer, and I had been explaining it to myself in every generous way I could think of. She was tired. They were stressed. It wasn't personal. People get busy. I'd been doing what I always did, filing the hurt inside somewhere quiet and smiling to keep the peace. My son's wife had been pleasant to my face all spring. She'd texted me about table linens. She'd asked my opinion on the menu. She'd let me believe we were building something together. And the whole time, she and her mother had been planning to fold me out like an extra leaf in the table. The thing about being 63 and having survived a marriage that ended badly and a decade of building yourself back up from nothing, you reach a point where you simply stop performing confusion. You don't feel. I wasn't confused. I knew exactly what I'd heard. I picked up my phone again. I didn't call my son's wife back. I didn't call my son. I went to my contacts and I started at the top of the party list. The first call was to the events coordinator at the venue, a woman named, well, it doesn't matter. She'd been my contact for 4 months. We'd had 3 meetings. She knew my voice. I told her there had been a change in circumstances and I needed to cancel the booking. She walked me through the cancellation terms. Because I was more than 30 days out, I was entitled to a partial refund, 40% of the deposit, not nothing. She said she was sorry to hear it and asked if I wanted to rebook for a later date. I said I didn't think that would be necessary. The second call was to the catering company, a family-run business out of Dundas that I'd chosen because the owner had grown up in the same neighborhood as my son. I told her that when I booked. She'd been warm about it. I told her I needed to cancel the catering order. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "Is everything okay?" I told her everything was fine, just a change in plans. She said she understood and would process the cancellation. I'd lose the 20% booking fee, but the food order hadn't been confirmed yet, so there was nothing further owed. She thanked me for letting her know in time. I sat down at the kitchen table after that call. The tarts were still unfinished on the counter. The radio had moved on to the noon hour news. Outside, the neighbor's dog was barking at something in the yard. I thought about my son, about 6 years of night classes, about the way he'd looked when he'd gotten the acceptance letter. He called me before he called anyone else, and I'd heard it in his voice. That particular kind of pride that's also relief, the kind that comes from years of sustained effort finally being recognized. I thought about what this party had meant to me, not as a performance, as a statement of fact. I love you. I am proud of you. You earned this. I thought about his wife, who was at that moment in a car somewhere on the QEW, not knowing that I'd heard any of it, probably still deciding on table arrangements for a party she intended to take for me. I made the third call. I called my son. He answered on the second ring, cheerful. He said, "Hey, Mom, you okay?" I said, "I need to tell you something. I'm going to tell it to you once, and I'm not going to be dramatic about it, but I need you to listen." He was quiet immediately. He knows that voice. I don't use it often. I told him what I'd heard. I didn't embellish. I didn't editorialize. I said, "Your wife and her mother were talking about removing me from the party and using the deposits I'd already paid." I said I needed him to know that I had already canceled the venue and the catering. There was a long silence on the line. Then he said, "Mom," just that. My name the way he'd said it since he was 3 years old and needed something he didn't know how to ask for. I said, "I'm not asking you to choose anyone. I'm telling you what happened. What you do with it is your business." He said he needed to call me back. I said, "Take your time." I hung up. I went back to the counter. I finished the tarts. I'm not sure why. Muscle memory, probably. Or maybe because I had agreed to bring them to my sisters that afternoon and I don't like letting people down. My sister, Nora, she's 68, lives in Mississauga, has the particular gift of being honest without being unkind. I told her everything over tea. She listened the way she always does, with her hands wrapped around her mug, not interrupting. When I finished, she said, "What do you need right now?" I said, "I think I just need someone to know." She said, "I know." That was enough. My son called back that evening. He'd spoken to his wife. I could tell from the quality of his voice that the conversation had not gone well, not between him and me, but between him and her. There was something tired and careful in how he spoke. He said he was sorry. I said I knew he was. He said he hadn't known any of it. He said his wife had told him the venue change idea had been his mother-in-law's suggestion and that she'd been going along with it to keep the peace. I let that sit for a moment. Then I said, "Going along with something that hurts someone isn't keeping the peace. It's just keeping someone else comfortable at your expense." He didn't say anything. I said, "I love you. I'm proud of you. That part doesn't change, but I'm not rebuilding this party, and I'm not pretending I didn't hear what I heard." He said he understood. We talked for another 20 minutes about easier things, about his daughter's soccer season, about the job offer he was weighing. By the end of the call, we sounded like ourselves again, or close to it. His wife did not call me. Her mother certainly did not call me. A week later, my son held a small dinner at their house. Just the four of us, him, his wife, my granddaughter, and me. His wife made pasta from scratch and set the table carefully and was polite in the specific way people are polite when they are managing something they haven't resolved yet. I was polite back, not cold, not warm in the way I used to be, somewhere accurate. My granddaughter sat beside me and showed me a drawing she'd made at school, a horse with disproportionately large eyes standing in front of what I was told was a mountain. I told her it was the finest horse I'd ever seen. She accepted this as obvious truth, the way children do, and moved on to the next subject. I stayed 2 hours and then I said I needed to get home. At the door, my daughter in law said, "Thank you for coming." I looked at her. I said, "Of course." I meant it. I came because I love my son and my granddaughter. But I came as myself, not as the version of myself that absorbs everything and asks for nothing and pretends not to notice. That woman left the room sometime around noon on a Saturday when she was standing at a kitchen counter with flour on her wrists. There are things you find out about people when the stakes get real. Weddings and graduations and the parties people throw around them, they strip back the surface. You see who shows up. You see who manages. You see who plans to fold you out quietly and use what you've already paid for. I found out something about my daughter-in-law that morning. I also found out something about myself. What I found out about myself was this. I had spent years making myself smaller so that other people could feel comfortable, not out of weakness. I want to be clear about that. Out of love and out of a belief that keeping things smooth was the same thing as keeping things good. It isn't. It's just smooth. Smooth has nothing to do with good. My son's graduation came and went. He had dinner with his department and came home. I sent him a card, the kind you find in a proper card shop, not the drugstore, with a check inside for an amount I'd had set aside for months. I wrote, "You earned this. I've been watching you earn it for years. I hope you know." He called when he got it. He sounded like himself. I'm writing this sitting at the same kitchen counter on a Sunday morning in November. The radio is on. There's snow in the forecast. Nora is coming over for lunch, and I'm making soup from the turkey bones I saved from last weekend, the way my mother used to do, the way I've done every November for 30 years. The $12,000 is mostly gone. The 40% deposit refund sits in an account I haven't touched. I'm not sure yet what I'll do with it. Maybe nothing. Maybe something for my granddaughter eventually, and rest part contribution, or the start of one, something that goes forward rather than back. My daughter-in-law and I have not spoken about what happened. I don't know if we ever will. I've made a kind of peace with that uncertainty, the same way you make peace with weather forecasts. Acknowledge them, prepare accordingly, and understand that some things aren't in your control. What is in your control is what you do after you hear something you weren't meant to hear, whether you call the venue, whether you finish the tarts, whether you drive to your sister's and let yourself be known by someone who has known you for 60 years. What is in your control is the decision not to keep being smaller than you are because it's easier for someone else. I made 3 calls that Saturday. The first 2 dismantled something. The third one started something else. Something harder and slower and less satisfying than a clean resolution, but more honest. More like what family actually is. The soup is almost ready. Nora will be here in an hour. Outside, the first snow of the season is coming down in the way it does in southern Ontario, quietly and without ceremony, covering everything equally. I've been standing in this kitchen a long time. I know how to tell the difference between a storm that passes and one that changes the shape of things. This one changed the shape of things. I'm still here. There's a particular kind of quiet that settles over a kitchen after something breaks. Not loud, not dramatic, just different. The radio still plays. The pastry is still on the counter. And you are standing there knowing that a version of your life that you believed in has just quietly closed. I've thought a lot about what happened that Saturday and about what made it possible. Not the cruelty of it, that's the easy part to name. What I've thought about is the sequence, how things like this don't arrive suddenly. They arrive in small installments. A cooling here, a careful politeness there. 100 small moments where I chose to explain away what I was feeling. because explaining it away was easier than sitting with what it meant. That's the part I own. I don't say it to be hard on myself. I say it because I think it's true, and because I've found that the truth, even when it's uncomfortable, is the only ground worth standing on. What I know now is this: there is a difference between being generous and being willing to disappear. I confused the two for a long time. I thought that absorbing things quietly, the overlooked opinions, the managed distance, the sense of being tolerated rather than welcomed, was a form of love. And love was in there. I don't doubt that. But love doesn't require you to make yourself invisible. That's not love. That's just fear wearing love's coat. The 3 calls I made that afternoon were not revenge. I want to be clear about that. They were clarity. They were me finally understanding that the money was never the point. The point was that I had been paying, in every sense, to be included in something that was never going to include me. Withdrawing that was not an act of anger, it was an act of honesty. And honesty, I've learned, is a form of respect for the other person, yes, but first for yourself. You cannot genuinely respect someone else while lying to yourself about what they are doing. That's not moral high ground. That's just distance dressed up as dignity. My son called me back. We talked for a long time. Not about the party, about what the party meant, about what kind of people we want to be in each other's lives going forward. That conversation required something from both of us. It required him to see something clearly that he had preferred not to see. It required me to say something plainly that I had preferred not to say. Neither of those things was comfortable. Both of them were necessary. Nora said something to me that afternoon over tea that I keep coming back to. She said, "The hardest thing about getting older isn't the body. It's learning which battles are actually yours to fight and finding the courage to fight them instead of just enduring them." She's right. Endurance gets mistaken for strength all the time, but endurance without discernment is just damage accumulation. Real strength is knowing when to absorb and when to act, and having the steadiness to do the right thing even when it costs you something, even when the outcome is uncertain, even when the person you love most is on the other side of the equation. I made the tarts. I drove to Nora's. I finished the week. And I am still here. Not smaller than I was, not harder than I was, but clearer. That clarity cost $12,000 in a party that never happened. I'd pay it again.